Hey, everybody. With us once again is Mark Collinsworth, a financial expert, and we have him on board for a specific reason. My big question is, with all the ways that China is stealing our intellectual property, our technology, going after us every which way, is there any way we could disengage from China without hurting ourselves, without hurting our own economy more than we hurt China? Mark Collinsworth of Bear Global Capital Wealth Investments, you're the expert. Is there a way we could disengage from China since they're stealing everything from us with impunity? If Biden was so inclined, and we know he's not, but if he's so inclined just to say, forget it, China, we're not going to engage with you financially or any other way anymore, what happens? Can we do it?
Well, Larry, unfortunately, I think we're just too far into it. I don't think there's really any way out of this. We buy so many products from China because they're just made so much cheaper. When you buy a product here and that's made in the United States, you're paying federal income taxes on it, state taxes, regulations, fines, permits, all of that stuff, and retirement plans are all built into that price. In China, there's no mandatory health insurance, no mandatory retirement plans, no federal tax, no state taxes. So they can produce a product extremely, extremely cheaper than here in the United States. And so if you do anything to China, you cut that off. As we've seen, that's the reason why we have the inflation rate now, is because so many of those cheap products aren't getting here because China is still in those lockdowns.
Yeah, but the counter argument would be, if you cut off trade with China and reestablish manufacturing in the U.S., wouldn't eventually that work out to our benefit and the prices would be reasonable if they could and wanted to do that?
Well, no, because if you wanted the prices to be cheaper here in the United States, because when you buy a product, let's say for $10, that $10 that includes the employees' retirement plans. That requires X amount of dollars for their mandatory health care programs. That includes the taxes that are being paid at the state level, the federal level, permits, licenses, all that stuff. So the only way you can lower those prices here is you basically are going to have to get rid of the minimum wage, get rid of health care, get rid of retirement plans, and get rid of regulations, because that's exactly how China gets their products so low.
Well, Mark, how did it work before the outsourcing began, when most manufacturing was in the U.S.? We were a lion of manufacturing. We're known around the world for it and for quality products.
Correct. And you probably remember before we did that, I'll give the example of a VCR. When I was a kid growing up, the VCR that we had in the house was bought here in the United States. I think it cost us, like in the 1970s, it cost us something like $700 for that VCR. Well, today, all the VCRs are now made overseas. In our house right now, we have 5 VCRs and none of them cost over $100. That's because they're made outside of the United States now versus in the 70s when they're made here running $700 a piece.
But even before the outsourcing, a new technology would be expensive, then they gradually come down in price, right? So wouldn't that still happen if everything was kept domestically?
Well, I'm going to disagree with that also, because China doesn't innovate. China really hasn't invented anything. They didn't invent the semiconductor. They didn't invent the smartphone. They didn't invent the semiconductor. They didn't invent the airplane. They didn't invent the car. They basically take ideas and technologies that other countries have created, they steal it, and then reproduce it in a region that has no minimum wage, no income tax, no state taxes, no mandatory employment, no mandatory retirement plans, and that's how they do it.
So what you're saying is there's no way that if manufacturing was brought back to the U.S. and we were buying our own products as we once did, that the prices would come down in any way affordable for the working and the middle class. That's gone.
Only if you were able to get rid of a lot of those fringe benefits. The fringe benefits that employees get today at their company, those fringe benefits do not exist in China.
Didn't they exist when manufacturing was still here?
Well, a lot of the manufacturing, if you remember back in the a lot of the regulations and stuff that we've had here, you probably remember when Roosevelt ran the guy that fought in the Cuban War. Teddy Roosevelt. He's the one that fought to get a lot of these laws in place. So when we're in our industrial firepower, a lot of this, there was no minimum wage. Like you probably remember, people complained that was working for 2 cents an hour. Well, when you put a $7 minimum wage out there, guess what? That $7 got passed on to the consumer.
But as I remember, when I was growing up, my father had a factory job, and we were like a working middle class family. But I mean, I remember products being somewhat affordable. It wasn't. I mean, everything wasn't dirt cheap, but it seemed like most working and middle class people could afford the basic necessity, and even beyond the basic necessity, luxury goods as well. Is my memory faulty?
Well,
That was in the 50s and 60s.
that was in the 50s and 60s, and prices did come down as more and more of that stuff got sent overseas. The U.S. manufacturers knew that they were going to lose out to China, so they tried their best to lower the prices.
Right.
Eventually, it got to a point that like, well, shoot, we can't compete with China. We have a minimum wage. We're
Right.
forced by law to pay all these licenses. We can't compete with China, so let's join China and let's send all of our jobs over there.
But that was only because the politicians allowed the jobs to be outsourced. If they hadn't opened the door and manufacturing was still largely contained in the U.S., what would it still have been workable? Is what I'm asking.
Well, that would have been on the job aspect, yes. But then the problem would have got into if you didn't allow the jobs to go overseas, you're still now competing with a country that has such lower prices on it. You'd have to go back and start putting tariffs on them to make those prices more comparable to the United States.
And what's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that. No politician has the balls to do it.
Because they're beholden to the corporations that want the cheap manufacturing abroad to import into the U.S. for a big markup, correct?
Correct. You either have corporations with the lobbyists are either paying the politicians not to pass tariffs, or you have the Chinese government doing, hey, if the Chinese government wants to do something, there's absolutely nothing stopping from the Chinese government giving $10 million to a politician under the table and putting it in a Chinese bank to where there's no reporting, nobody knows anything about it because the Chinese government controls all the reporting to it. So yeah, there's just no way around it.
All right. Second big question would be China, the way I understand it, owns most of our debt. Now, if let's say Biden, had an awakening and decided to cast off China, what could they do in retaliation that would make Biden or another president think twice about doing that?
Well, one thing they could do is they could take all that debt they have that they've bought up. And of course, remember, when you buy U.S. Treasury bonds, you have to buy it in U.S. dollars. So the first thing China has to do is they have to buy dollars, which drives up the price of the dollar more, which drives down the value of the Chinese dollar, making goods even cheaper. Then they buy the Treasury bonds.
All right, so that shows China buys up our debt, our debt in terms of buying Treasury bonds, U.S. Treasury bonds. Correct?
Yep. So if China wanted to dump all that Treasury bonds, they would dump the Treasury bonds. That would drive up interest rates massively. You can't handle $3 trillion hitting the Treasury bond market in one day. It would cause a collapse in the bond market, which then would spill over into the stock market. Not to mention the U.S. dollar would collapse because I have a feeling that when they're selling the bonds, they're going to start selling dollars to convert that back into Chinese dollars.
All right. So we take a hit if we decided to do that.
Mm-hmm.
China dumps all the Treasury bonds and all that. When the dust settles, who's hurt more and who would actually emerge in better shape, China or the U.S.?
I think China would emerge better, just simply because the debt hit on the United States would be so painful. The stock market crash that would follow that would be so painful. Not to mention, China has all these other places that still be doing business with, that still be getting business from, Europe, Asia, Canada, Latin America. So they have other cash flow regions that it would reduce the impact.
Yeah, I was going to say, for a lot of people, including myself, your first thought is, well, if we stop buying all of these products from China, they go down the drain too. But you're saying not so, because there's other markets beyond the U.S., significant markets that would keep them going.
Correct. The United States has become much more similar to Europe. We're following Europe's path very similar in the way we put minimum wages in place, mandatory unemployment benefits, healthcare benefits. So Europe's seeing the same problems as we are. Europe's starting to outsource a lot of its products to China also. So there's really no difference between the United States and Europe now.
So, Mark, I mean, what's the upshot of this? That there's no way that we could shake off the shackles of China, the grip that they have on us economically, now even militarily. There's nothing we could do about it.
Correct. Just kind of give you kind of a fun fact here. The interest payments that we pay China on the debt that we owe to them, the interest payments alone finances 100% of their entire military budget.
So therefore, we're supporting the buildup of the Chinese military through this process.
With our interest payments that we pay to them on the debt. Yep.
All right. So again, if we dump all that, we just say, we're not going to pay you anymore. What happens?
Well, we can't just stop paying them because that would make the United States go into default. The Chinese basically would have to sell all of the treasury bonds. So we're kind of stuck in that. We can't not pay them the interest on our payments.
Or otherwise, the U.S. would no longer be considered a reliable.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So Mark, I mean, they're building up the military. There's no question that they want to replace the U.S. as the dominant nation. Not only are they controlling the economy of the U.S., but other countries as well, more and more. But now they have an enormous military and the largest navy in the world. So it looks like unless something changes, and you're saying chances of that are slim, unless something changes, they're going to dominate the world, and the U.S. is going to be in second place, dancing to their tune. Correct?
The only thing that could happen, and you saw this with Donald Trump, he put the tariffs. Donald Trump kind of laid it down kind of hot and heavy on China. I mean, China just here in the last week told Nancy Pelosi, "We'll shoot your airplane down if you go into Taiwan." Yeah. I mean, for love of a foreign government just blatantly told us on the news, "We'll shoot your third highest ranking person down if you come into that airspace." Yeah. Under Donald Trump, that wouldn't have happened.
And what was Biden's response? Well, the military told me that's not a good idea that she goes to Taiwan at this point. Yeah. That's the response of the president.
How dare a foreign country tell us what we can and cannot do in another country's airspace? How dare they say that?
All right, you're saying it would have been different under Trump. I know he read the riot act in North Korea, but China is a different story. What could Trump actually do if he's in office now and China made a threat like that?
I tell you exactly what Donald Trump would have done. The second China said that, if China had the balls to even say that Donald Trump in office, Donald Trump would have told them point blank, "You do anything to Nancy Pelosi's airplane, that will be an act of war, and I will sign a declaration of war against China," and I guarantee you they would have backed down in a heartbeat. The second thing that could have happened, he could have gone in there and slapped in massive tariffs, put 500, 700% tariffs on China, and the United States would never buy another Chinese product ever again. Yeah, it would hurt the U.S. consumer, but China would be in a hurting place like no tomorrow.
But again, that would be getting back to the scenario that you were going through a few minutes ago, that if we stop buying Chinese goods, our economy goes down. So with steep tariffs, it'd be the same thing, wouldn't it?
It'd be the exact same thing. Boy, China would feel it. China wouldn't risk that.
So China wouldn't risk that immediate hit, even though, again, when the dust settles, they've got other markets beyond the U.S. So why wouldn't they just say, "Well, good, do what you want, we don't care"?
They probably would, but they would just suck it up, because if I had to guess, China knows that all they'd have to do is wait. President only serves, 8 terms max. Trump would only be in his last term at that point, so he could only serve one last term. They would just sit back and go, "Hey, we'll just ride this out for another 2 years. New president comes in, Biden, whoever, and we'll just pay them off, and then so be it. It's back to business as usual."
And option 2, if it did come to war, would we win a war and even risk going to war against China?
I think we would basically, at this point, I think we would probably lay a hurt, because the United States, we don't do a lot of things. We don't manufacture products very well. There's a lot of things the United States just doesn't do well. But one thing that we are exceedingly good at is we make some of the best military technology in the world. And China knows that.
Well, according to reports, China has increasingly sophisticated weaponry, including hypersonic missiles, which could take out U.S. warships, including our aircraft carriers. Then what?
This is one thing I've learned from my time in the military. If the military is telling you something, you should automatically think the reverse of it. There's a reason why they're telling you. If you're strong, make you look. If there's something about the military that's strong, make your enemy think you're weak there. If you're weak someplace, make your military think you're strong someplace. And I think the reason why the military said that is they're trying to get voters and politicians, because a lot of the politicians, they're clueless. They know those politicians might not be in office in another 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road. They have no clue to what the military level is at. The military says that stuff to get politicians and voters fired up that the military budget needs to grow bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, our last podcast, we talked about how Chinese, the Huawei Chinese telecommunications company, they have their apparatus atop U.S. cell phone towers near U.S. missile bases. So, isn't that a threat where supposedly, conceivably, they could intercept and even change the ability for the U.S. to launch missiles? So, I mean, if that's true, would we necessarily win a war against China?
If the military is saying it, again, I have to go back. If it's being broadcast, you're basically giving the Chinese a false sense of security. If the Chinese hear that right now, they'll think, "Oh, we've got the military beat. We can play with their missile systems." No.
In fact, there was a critic who went to our comments section and said that this is all a bunch of baloney because that's old technology. The only thing they could listen to with the cell phone technology is old technology, 40 to 50 years old. So therefore, this could be a ruse purposely planted by the military to make the Chinese think they've got access to our launch codes.
Oh yeah, and I've even just being on YouTube and reading some of the people that are out there. I've even read reports that saying that U.S. military technology is so advanced, you could actually take the schematics and hand it to the Chinese, and they wouldn't be able to decipher it. It'd be the essential of handing an iPhone schematic to a caveman and telling him to duplicate.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. Now that they're launching probes to the moon, they've landed on the moon. They're actually planning manned moon landings before long. I mean, to me, the technology is stolen from us, admittedly, but they're fast learners, and I don't know if they can't figure out the technology, no matter how sophisticated it is from us.
Well, let's not forget about this, Larry. Also, those fancy stealth bombers that we first saw in the Gulf War back here in the early 1990s, the triangular shaped aircraft that was supposed to be the state of the art. Let's not forget, there was people outside of Area 51 in the early 1950s taking pictures of these same triangular aircraft and calling them UFOs in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And then we see them in the Gulf War 40 years later. So that tells me they already had developed that technology 40 years earlier and just started using a war then.
Okay, so what you're saying is, the bottom line here is that we could probably beat China militarily, but there's no way we're going to be beating them economically because of the grip they've got on our economy and buying our debt and all that, right? So there's no way out of this.
That's true. Economically, they are beating us. We beat them right now, I think, militarily, but long-term, economically, if they can keep the economic powerhouse going, they will eventually surpass us on the military technology side.
Unless Trump or somebody like Trump comes in with big tariffs.
Big tariffs or lays down the law and gets really, really tight. I mean, come on. We had what was a senator from California? His live-in girlfriend was a Chinese spy. He sat on the U.S. Intelligence Committee.
Yeah.
Come on.
That was Fang Fang.
Yeah.
Really think sweet little Fang Fang was up to no good, like espionage?
Yeah, the second she got through banging his brains out and he was sleeping, probably from a Mickey she slipped in his drink, she's over there on his computer just typing away, emailing stuff to China.
And Nancy Pelosi refused to remove him from the Intelligence Committee.
Yeah, because and the reason why is because no one wants to stand up to China. Just like in 1938, when Great Britain had the opportunity to stand up against Hitler, it was like, oh, hey, no, we just don't want any problems here. You probably remember from the history books, the Rhineland. It was a 50-mile corridor that no military troops should be allowed to go into. Hitler said, I want to test out to see if these people are serious about stopping me. I want to move my army into this region that's not allowed to have any soldiers in it, and let's see if anyone says anything. Guess what? They didn't say anything, and then Hitler was like, "Hot damn! I can run the board now."
And the way Biden withdrew from Afghanistan was a signal to China that they may not do anything if they go ahead, and that we may not do anything if they go ahead and invade Taiwan.
Oh, that was the thing. We spent years, actually decades, building out that military base in there to purposely be a strategic stronghold. If we ever went to war with China, we're sitting on their back door. You know, we got our forces in the Pacific Ocean. Now we have the largest military base in the world sitting on their back door to hit them from both sides. We pull out, and guess what? I heard just a few months ago the Chinese government is now trying to buy that military base from Afghanistan.
Yeah, and all the billions of dollars of military equipment we left behind.
Oh, and I've read reports that military base could have taken a direct nuclear hit, and it wouldn't even put a scratch on it.
Yeah, in fact, it's positioned close to China, the border, so it's in an ideal position to keep an eye on China and strike China if necessary. And Biden gave it up. You know, it's one thing after another with Biden that makes no sense, at least seemingly makes no sense, seemingly continues to weaken the U.S. Now, is this just stupidity on his part? Is it just, you know, a woke doctrine that's gone wild? Or is there something else going on here? What do you think? I mean, is it all just incompetence and stupidity and politicking, or is there something more dire and destructive behind it?
This is my take. Let's just say Joe Biden's just senile. He doesn't have a clue. He's like grandpa, you know, hey, grandpa, give grandpa some cocoa and put him in the corner at the Christmas party because he doesn't have a clue to what's going on. It's the same thing with President Grant, the lobbyist. He used to get drunk and he used to sign stuff and not know it. Somebody there in the White House has got a connection. Maybe it's Fang too, got a connection with China. And they're saying, hey, I'll pay you $10 million if you get Joe Biden to sign this piece of paper. Whatever it is, Joe Biden's not running the show. He's not president of the United States.
All right. So the people around him who are running the show know the effects of these policies, the detrimental effects of the U.S. So what you're saying is who's ever pulling his strings is the one that's in cahoots with China. So is it one person, several people, a whole bunch of people? I mean, are they all in on? Because, you know, across the administration, they're all doing crazy stuff that makes no sense at all. So are they all on board with the plot behind the scenes, or are they just being so doctrinaire with political correctness and all that they're ignoring the possible consequences of all this?
Well, I think it's two key parts here. One, somebody's benefiting financially from getting this stuff done. That's one. But the more important thing is, I don't really think that what they think they know and what's really happening in the real world, they're totally disconnected from reality. Give you a perfect example. All these states like Texas, Florida, Arizona, they've been saying for years, we can't handle the inflow of immigrants. They're overflowing our school system. They're overflowing our welfare systems. We just can't handle them. They start putting them on buses and start sending them to Chicago and Washington, D.C. And the people in D.C. and Chicago are like, whoa, hold up for a minute. You can't send them here. They're overwhelming our school system. They're overwhelming our healthcare system. You can't send them here. And that happened because the Democrats in D.C. didn't think it was a problem. They thought it was the right thing to do and weren't listening to the people that were actually experiencing the problem. Now they're experiencing the problem. They have the same complaints as the people in Texas.
Right. I mean, I know, and that's because, you know, they were so concerned about being liberal and woke and progressive and all that. But I mean, what we're talking about is in terms of our national security and our survival militarily as well as economically. And these people are still going along with it because they're making money on the side from China.
Well, it's probably the same thing. You know, we'll use Lenin. When Lenin overthrew Russia in 1917, he probably sat there and went, hey, this communist stuff, this communism doesn't work. There's just no way it can work. But you know what? I'm going to be running at one of the largest countries in the world, making a ton of money doing it. Yeah, let's do it. A lot of these people know that the end result is detrimental to everybody outside of the circle that's running everything.
So it goes back to the old thing, as long as I'm grabbing money and improving my lifestyle, the hell with everybody else, even on a massive scale like this, endangering the survival economically and militarily of the U.S.
Well, yeah, because then if you're in that circle, the United States can collapse. Hey, if somebody has a $100 million mansion given to them over in Shanghai and they're getting paid $10 million a year in a bank account, who cares if the United States collapses? Hey, I've got a backup plan in China.
You know, or their or their private islands or
Yeah,
their bunkers, wherever they may be, you know, according to some of the popular conceptions now. And who knows if that isn't true, that they you know, they've got a runaway place to all set in case their own machinations brings about the destruction of the U.S. So
they've got their backup plan. If something goes wrong, if the United States collapses, they've got a backup plan to go someplace else.
yeah, and don't forget the corporations for some time are in effect multinationals now. They have no loyalty or incentive to center their activities for the benefit of the U.S. because it's a global market where they make their money.
That's exactly right.
And it didn't used to be that way.
No, used to, Walmart was built on the premise, made in America. You go to Walmart now and you'll see made in China.
Yeah. You try to find them. Whenever I go there, I try to find something American product. I always look where it's made, China and other places. Very seldom you get an American made product. And then they're usually something that's, really simple and, basic, rather than the other stuff that people need. So
This is also, I want to say, this is not something that just happened over the last 2 or 3 years. This has been a problem that's been developing over decades in the U.S. economy.
Again, closing perspective here. I keep bringing up the parallels with the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. It became fat and oversatisfied, indulgent, overextended militarily, overextended in terms of managing all this expansion, and it became an effete civilization. Again, there was a vast difference between the aristocrats and the plebeians. The mechanisms that Rome was built on in the beginning that made empire work, that made Rome work before it became an empire, gradually were eroded away for indulgence. So to me, there seems to be increasing parallels with what's going on in the U.S. and what went on in Rome.
You're exactly right. And one thing I'll add to that list of stuff that you had, or two things I'll add. Once the Roman Empire got out of its expansion mode with invading people, with taking over other countries, all that money that the Senate had, they started putting that in infrastructure plans. They started being, let's build an aqueduct, let's build better water systems, let's try to work on cleaner water, let's even work on a healthcare system. So they tried to improve the daily life of people, similar to what we're seeing here. But more importantly, what I really think led to the main downfall of Rome is that over the centuries or the generations of Roman citizens having children, they thought they were too good to basically mow their own yards or even take care of their children. They had nannies that were conquered slaves, or they had immigrants that came in there that was installing a new culture into those children. And after that culture was ingrained over decades and decades and generations of being told that culture that Romans are bad people, they're racist, they think they're the supremacist of the world. When Rome really needed those children to step up and defend their homeland from invading countries, they sat back and went, it's about time these Romans got what was coming to them. They're a bunch of racists and white supremacists and all this kind of stuff. Thank God the Vikings are teaching them a lesson. Thank God that the Germanic Huns are teaching them a lesson. And that's why I think the Roman Empire fell, is because of the wokeness that was ingrained in generations of kids.
Doesn't all that sound familiar? What's going on? Wow. Yeah. All right. Well, if we survive for another time, so we can do another podcast fairly soon, we'll see all you folks back here soon. And Mark Collinsworth, of the Chief Investment Officer of Bear Global Wealth Management, thanks very much for being with us once again for some interesting perspectives and insights. See you later.